Good morning. Not surprisingly, a host of states like Maharashtra, Uttar Pradesh, and Haryana have started cancelling contracts of Chinese companies in their states. This is an issue that we have raised, that we have warned about in the past as well. Essentially, what it does, it raises costs for Indian industry. So, in the case of 4G, we have a story today in Financial Express which essentially says that if Chinese companies are to be banned and Indian telcos are to buy 4G equipment from European vendors, this will increase the cost by at least 25 to 30%, 20 to 25%. And then there's the cost of almost free financing, which a lot of these vendors do. So that's another cost which the Indian companies will have to bear. Indeed, another very stupid proposal. I'm sorry to use such harsh word, but a very stupid proposal is that from Niti Aayog. Essentially, what Niti Aayog has done is to say that not only will the state-owned BSNL not be buying Chinese equipment for their 4G plans, they should be buying purely indigenous 4G solutions. Now, this is a problem because there are no well-developed, tested, commercially viable Indian solution there. In fact, in the 80s and the 90s, we found CDOT coming out with its own, level of technology, which it said would work very well, and it just didn't work. Yeah. So promoting local technology is a very, very good thing. But if a company like BSNL is going to have to bear the brunt of it and to use untried, untested technology, while the private sector companies all use top class technology, it is going to set it back once again quite badly. So hopefully the government will not go by what Niti Aayog is saying. We need to look at in detail the impact of some of these things that we are doing as far as China is concerned. Another example of teach the Chinese a lesson is the plan. We have a story on this to impose import duties on solar cells. Now this will raise the cost of Indian solar energy production. So again, that's a cost that we need to figure out whether we want to be paying it. And certainly in areas like battery technology, which is critical for electric vehicles, but the Chinese are world leaders out there. So do we really want to be doing do we really want to be taking these measures, which will end up hurting us ourselves? That China would start wooing India's neighbors like Bangladesh with trade deals was something that we should have expected. So we have a story lead in our lead story package today. So, but what is worrying in this case is not just the fact that China is offering these deals to people, but really India's lack of response. So not only have we not given enough trade deals and investments and other things which would keep our neighbors invested in our progress, in our prosperity, we have even delayed trade deals with the EU and the United States. So Vietnam, as we know, ratified a trade deal, an FTA with the EU about a week, 10 days ago. And because of that, in the case of textiles alone, it will get a 16% import duty advantage over India when goods are exported to the EU. So these are all factors that the government needs to keep in mind. Its response so far has been quite sluggish. Hopefully that will change, let's see. Meanwhile, in a related development to China, to the events at the Galwan Valley, Home Minister Rajnath Singh has flown to Russia to take part in a Victory Day celebration there. Of course, the main reason is to talk to the Russians about equipment for India in terms of basically we have good ties with Russia anyway, but to re-cement them because that's really critical right now. But as we said in the past, India simply cannot hope to fight the Chinese if India does not fix its economy. This is not just in terms of industrial production or things like that. This is in terms of getting the GDP to rise. So the amount of spending that you can do on education, on doctors, on university, all that goes up. Because all of these, keep in mind, are factors that make China far more competitive than India is. This is today's really big non-China, non-Corona story. And the story is that UTI has finally got a SEBI approval for an IPO. Now, on the face of it, this is just another 3,500 crore fundraising by a mutual fund. So it's not that important there. But what makes this important really is the story behind it. A story that I'm proud to say Financial Express was the first to report way back in 2011, and a story which is very, very important for a variety of reasons, as you will just see here. In 2011, as we reported then, the finance ministry, the UPA government in power at that time, the finance ministry tried to impose its candidate and make sure that that candidate became the CEO of UTI. And since the bulk of shareholders, about 74% of equity of UTI is held by four PSUs, 18.5%, I think each they own SBI, Bank of Baroda, Punjab National Bank, and LIC. The sole private sector firm in UTI, which holds a 26% share, is T. Rowe Price. It's an American investment company. So essentially, when the finance ministry tried to impose its candidate, T. Rowe Price and UTI's trustee board, somehow or the other managed to stave it off. But the problem was that due to this, for a long time, UTI remained headless. And keep in mind that, when we're talking about the four PSUs owning a large share of UTI, keep in mind that in 2000, when there was a UTI collapse and then the Vajpayee government came up with a bad UTI, and the current UTI was made. At that time, when the government brought in T. Rowe Price to help professionalize the management, it did tell it that the company would be professionally run. Yeah. So, in fact, and so much for being professionally run. In the period since 2011, two of the PSUs which own a share of UTI actually tried to get UTI to merge with their mutual fund. And this is when the SEBI rules are quite clear, and they say that nobody who promotes a mutual fund, an asset management company in jargon, nobody who promotes a mutual fund can actually own a share in another mutual fund. So technically, SBI and all these organizations should not have been allowed to buy into UTI, but that was a very, very different situation. It was a very desperate situation in 2000. So the four PSUs were roped in, so was T. Rowe Price, and the four PSUs were granted an exemption by SEBI. But the understanding at that time was that over a period of time, as things in UTI stabilized, these four PSUs were exited. Not only did they not exit, in 2018, finally SEBI ruled that the four PSUs would need to cut their stake in UTI to less than 10%. The deadline was March 2019. March 2019 came, it went, nothing happened. SEBI decided to increase the deadline, to extend the deadline by another year. March 2020 also came, and even now, under the new plan, PNB will hold more than 15% stake in UTI. So it tells you, how difficult it is to doing business in India. And as a result of this conflict over the appointment of a head of UTI, and then there's been this constant battling happening with the finance ministry involved, the banks involved, LIC involved. As a result of which, work in UTI has slipped, not surprising, and UTI has slipped one notch already in its ranking. So in any case, to cut a long story short, the IPO was considered to be the way out of the problem, and it seemed to be something which everybody would support, because the banks in any case needed the money very desperately for their capital requirements. Yet for whatever reason, the IPO just kept getting postponed, and it's now finally happened. So at one level, that looks like a happy ending. But here's the problem. As part of this deal, which has just been cleared by SEBI, T. Rowe Price now has to reduce its stake in UTI by 3%. So it's now at 23%. So when it has 23% under the Indian rules, it no longer has veto power over certain kind of things that can happen in UTI or any other company for that matter. So should the government allow or direct, as it has in the past, the PSUs to act in concert and maybe gang up against T. Rowe Price or decide who they're going to nominate, T. Rowe Price can no longer block this, because it no longer has a 26% vote, which allows it to do this. So as we've seen in the case of any reform in India, any investment decision, when one good decision gets taken, that's not the end of the matter, because that good decision is always left with a few new pitfalls that are introduced, or with enough of the old pitfalls which have not been fixed. So UTI still remains a sort of a dicey area. There's been a movement forward. Whether this movement is enough, whether UTI will finally be run as a professional company, that's something that we can only hope for. It's critical that it does, but whether it does or whether it does not has not been decided by the SEBI move for the IPO. We have to wait and see. Our next story is about how the Supreme Court has finally relented and allowed the Odisha government to go ahead with the proposed Jagannath Yatra. And basically, the argument made by the central government was that if the yatra was not allowed this time around, then for another 12 years there would be no yatra. So the Supreme Court has relented in this case, and what it has said is that if the Odisha government can ensure that there are no crowds, so they'll put barricades and things like that. So if the Odisha government can ensure that there are no crowds, then they can go ahead with the yatra. So our editorial here today essentially says that this is a bad idea for a variety of reasons. First, let's be very clear, there cannot be a yatra. It's very, very unlikely that there will be a yatra with very limited number of participants, social distancing, whatever else. Given this, I think the yatra can be, another super spreader event. So, basically, from whatever it appears, the central government and the Supreme Court seem to be playing with people's lives. And not only people's lives in Orissa, it will be people's lives across the country, given the speed at which the virus can spread. I don't think anyone wants to deny the role of faith or to say that the yatra is unimportant. I mean, very clearly the yatra is very, very important. But the point is that for many, many months, temples, churches, mosques across the country were shut for this very reason. So nobody denied that faith was important, but they were shut because they said that people collect. And if you need to control the pandemic, you just have to stop these churches and temples and mosques from functioning. So, is the Supreme Court arguing that the faith in those temples that were shut was less, or the mosque was less? And if you're going to allow the Jagannath Yatra to carry on in Orissa, why stop the one in Ahmedabad? In fact, as our edit says, it has been celebrated in Ahmedabad, from 1878. So, this is clearly something where the central government got it quite wrong by arguing for the yatra, and frankly, the Supreme Court has fallen for this religion card, and hopefully we don't know, but hopefully we will not pay a heavy price. But if the COVID cases spike after the yatra, it will be like the Tablighi events, and then it will be interesting to see whether the social reaction to this event will be as dramatic or as condemning as it was, after the Tablighi had their event in New Delhi, and after we found a huge spiraling in cases, not just in Delhi but across the country. At a time when the Delhi High Court has asked the Delhi government to step up the rapid antigen testing quite dramatically, our lead columnist today, Dr. Srinath Reddy of the Public Health Foundation of India, advises caution. He says that even the gold standard, the RT-PCR, it is not foolproof. It just gets it right in about 60 to 70% of cases. That is why, in fact, you would recall Delhi Health Minister Satinder Jain actually tested negative the first time around, and that's probably the reason why he almost died, because he lost a lot of valuable time in getting treatment there. So if the RT-PCR, Dr. Reddy argues, if the RT-PCR detects only about 70% of the cases or gets it right in just about 70% of the time, the rapid antigen tests fare even worse. So Dr. Reddy believes that you need to have a combination of the rapid antigen test and the PCR. That is ideally the kind of strategy that you require. But the thing that is worrying here is that if you look at the dramatic build-up in Delhi's testing over the last few days, almost all of it, or the bulk of the build-up, is basically due to these rapid antigen tests. So what you might have is a situation where we are focusing too much on a test that has the ability, or that has a tendency to get it quite wrong quite often. And another inexplicable move in the context of Delhi's fight or India's fight against Corona is the decision of the Delhi government and the central government to slash the rates that private laboratories are allowed to charge for RT-PCR tests. Now, whether this means that the private labs will stop, will lower their testing levels, there are some news reports which suggest that this has begun to happen. So whether the private labs will cut back on their testing, or whether they'll start using cheaper kits, because there are lots of, there's a big price variation in the kits that are available. So whether these private labs start using cheaper kits, we have to wait and see. The cheaper kits obviously have have an even lower level of reliability. So essentially, this is what happens when the government is habitually suspicious of the private sector, and it starts putting caps and all kinds of other either other controls. You have a problem. This is something we've discussed in the past as well. So eventually, we might have a situation if things go on the way they are, whereas Delhi is doing a lot of testing, but the quality of the testing will not be good enough. So we will actually feel that we are safe and secure, and because we might have the infection, we'll just go and keep spreading it. In fact, a related story in this context is the Delhi government insisting that people who've had corona, who after about 8 or 10 days of the treatment, they don't have to be tested again. Now, if you don't test these people again, how do you really know whether they've got cured? So there is a problem here in the sense that the Delhi government is insisting that doctors issue certificates to these people that they have been cured, and the doctors are protesting. That's one part of the problem. But as I said, a larger part of the problem is that if people are not going to be tested, then how do we know that they've actually been cured? In which case they can just come out of their quarantine, either in hospitals or at home, and go around spreading the disease there. So that's not good news. Hopefully good sense will prevail. Fingers crossed. Have a great day. Thank you.